This is a Podfire production.
Hi, I'm Ryan and welcome to the Neuronirvana podcast, where we dive into everything to do with mental health and well-being. Anything that can improve your life, we're here to talk about. All right, Trystan, thanks for coming back. Welcome to part 2 of our conversation. And I don't know if you remember, but our last conversation ended off, we were talking about journaling, and I was saying how beneficial journaling was. But then you're asking me if I was doing it, and I said, look, I'm not doing it much at the moment. And then you basically asked me, well, if there's something that you know works and is good for you, why aren't you doing it? Which, good question. Very good question.
Thanks, Ryan. It's good to be back with you. Yeah, part 2. That was a couple of weeks ago we first met. And yeah, you've just triggered my memory there that something I hadn't raised in the first episode was about cognitive dissonance, which basically is about knowing that something is bad for one's health or one's psychological well-being, and yet we still do it. So a good example is smoking. We know that this is really unhealthy and really bad for our well-being, and yet we continue to do it. You can look at it, particularly around addiction and denial. Why is it that you continue with a particular behavior that doesn't serve you? Now, the flip side is the point I put to you last time about excuses, procrastination, and you recognize that activity of journaling, and it's not so much about the specific topic, it's more about the process and a cathartic experience of trying to get your memories, your thoughts down on paper. And that doesn't have to make sense per se, and it's for you, it's for your benefit. And yeah, people can sort of make sense if they're overwhelmed with situations in their lives, and so it's a good, I think, as I recall, you sort of wanted me to talk about different tips or exercises or patterns of behavior that will improve your psychological well-being. So we touched on journaling, and then you mentioned that you really enjoy it, but why aren't you doing it?
So that just brought up a good question, is in society today, you brought up smoking, but there's obviously, like, everyone knows how to eat healthy, right? But none of us are doing it. So a big thing that I like to talk about when I'm talking to clients and talking to people, it's not about what you know, it's what you use of what you know. So people say knowledge is power, right? But I like to say knowledge is potential power.
Okay,
You can know everything under the sun, but like I said, if you're not doing it, I feel it's actually worse if you know what you need to do and you're not doing it, because then you got that guilt factor, right?
Well, that's the dissonance. Basically, that's the dissonance of I know the pursuit of this behavior will help, but why do I not do? And going back to a diet, you know, we all indulge. We're all subject to, you know, advertising and commercialization, and the food products that aren't healthy for us are high in sugar and fat. And I'm interested more in terms of, right, I ate the burger and the soda and lots of sugar on board. Then there's the guilt, and that actually keeps you in that automatic negative loop that, you know, I shouldn't have done that, but I did, and then
then you feel worse, and then you go do more of it.
And then you do more of the same negative behavior.
So I feel like, you know, if it was so black and white as to this is bad and this is good, and if you leave all the emotional out of it, of course, logically, you're like, well, of course I shouldn't do that, or I should be doing that. But I feel like today, you've got to be getting something, even though it's bad for you, there's something that you're gaining out of that for you to continue that behavior. Right?
Sure, the fat and the sugar, and we are designed to gorge as human beings, because, you know, if you look at sort of a reptilian brain, and I think we touched on this in the last podcast, that we're not as sophisticated and as advanced as we would try to convince ourselves that we are. So you're being driven to take on as many calories as possible.
Yeah.
That's the animal sort of the reptilian brain, the fight, the survival, and yet we're just subjected to 24-hour food, calories, and people don't know how to put a brake on it, and they get overweight and they feel that, that there's negative self-esteem, and they get caught in a loop, as you rightly pointed out, and that's what the manufacturers and the advertisers want, the individual to, the more you do it, the worse you feel, and the worse you feel, the more you do it.
Yeah. So you get stuck in that loop. And like the thing that I have noticed, especially because like we've as a community or as a human race have gone so far, and technology is going so fast that we are living in a completely different world to what we did, 100 to 300 years ago. But as you were saying, your reptilian brain is still stuck in the Stone Ages, right? So it's very hard for us to keep up with our psychology and our health and trying to keep up with the way things are going because we're so stuck in this 2 million old, reptilian brain. So it's more important now than ever to be aware of that and to try and combat all the stimulus coming in that's pushing us to do the exact thing that we're not trying to do.
That's so right. And then I think, again, you've touched on something very important there, that if there's a negative emotion generated, we are designed to be with that and to resolve and find solutions. And actually, so if
it's a feedback, it's telling you that there's something wrong and telling you that you need to change something.
Yeah, and you need to be with that and find a solution. And how does one then change that behavior? But with the advent of tech and of cell phones, we're not forced, and maybe that's not the right adjective, but
it's too easily to
distract. Than actually be with that negative emotion. And the way we're conditioned by a commercial consumerist society is that you don't have to be with that negative.
No.
You can distract
you can
yourself
mask it up with everything.
Whether it be gaming, and this is not to be negative about gaming, but the tech industry is designed and the social platforms are designed to keep you revisiting. So you never actually have to be with that negative outcome or that negative emotional state. And it's in there that you find the solution.
Definitely. This is why I'm sure you're the same. I like to promote stuff that puts you in, forces you to look at this stuff. So meditation, great,
Brilliant.
All distractions out. Okay, sit with what it is that you need to sit with instead of distracting yourself. So and that's why it's so hard for some people to do, because they don't want to sit with it because of what might come up, what might they think about themselves, or you're running away from the exact thing that you actually need to do.
Most definitely, and it's almost back to the dissonance. I should be doing. I'm a little bit off put by the shoulds and shouldn'ts. However, there are times when this is behaviour one should pursue.
Yeah.
The rigidity and clinically we look at being concrete in terms of having to do this. And I like Albert Ellis, who is the forefather. He developed rational emotive therapy, which is the forerunner to cognitive behavioural therapy. And he said, don't should on me and I won't should on you. He spoke about masturbation, which is a great turn of phrase, that I must be doing this. If I'm not doing this, then somehow, I'm not performing. And the rigidity and the concreteness of the psychology is...
We put all these barriers and we put all these expectations on ourselves through whatever it may be, values, your upbringing or whatever. And we've got all these barriers, I suppose, and it's about trying to break them down and not so much like you said, not so much like I should be doing this, I should be doing that. But then, this is why journaling is so good as well. It's allowing you to create space between the words and the thoughts to really think about it and to really process it in a way that you don't normally do, because it's so, when you're thinking, especially in your head, it's even better to say it out loud because it slows you down and you can hear what you say, and it makes I'm sure we've all been there. You've been there. You're stuck in your head about something, and then if you say it out loud or you write it down, you're like, that doesn't fucking make any sense. Like, but you're convincing yourself through whatever it is, our past or whatever. You're convincing yourself that what it is that you should or shouldn't be doing. But yeah, that's why I think meditation and the journaling will definitely put you back and just allow you to create that space to really think about. I don't know, we just talked about before off air, like your shadow self.
Well, we can explore that, I think it's... But just to, while we're on a point, I really like what you said between that gap, mind of the gap, mind as in your consciousness and being in that space. And that's what meditation hopefully aims to achieve, being in the space between the thought and the action, or the emotion and the thought. You're right on the money there in terms of... And so that's been developed into mindfulness, which is very vogue at the moment, which I really like, and being with your thoughts. And it's back to, this in 2022, we don't allow ourselves, or we're being bombarded by advertising and distraction. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there, mate. You've got to be in that space. And that can come through being in flow and being creative, whether it be writing or art or music or sport and passion. And you're in that gap.
Yeah, surfing does that for me. Like, nature's a really good one. Yeah. And I think it's interesting to see when you follow famous people like Einstein and Newton and stuff, and they will all say that their best ideas or their best breakthrough didn't come when they were doing
sat at their desk.
It was like in the shower, where you have that space and you have that sort of or nothingness, or that, you know what I mean, where you allow stuff to come in. You're in a receiving mode of receiving what can come.
Lovely. Well, you're right, and I think so. Again, back to clinical psychology, we talk about a blunted affect. So if you're struggling with emotions, you actually condense how you're being and miss the periphery. And I think that's what you're articulating. Some of the greatest ideas are not sought after, but it's about being receptive and open to what's going on around you. And then, revolutionary ideas or sort of insight. It doesn't have to be so grandiose, but making the connection with where you are and being able to receive the information and that being in flow is something that we're losing.
Yeah. And like, you can become in flow through many different forms, like you're saying, sport and work. I think
surfing's a great one.
For me, it's the perfect storm. You got the ocean. Which I think it's got magical powers. Like, every time I jump in the ocean, I'm a completely different person. Sure. And when it's out there, it's just you and the wave, you know what I mean? And to jump, when you're on that wave, there's no thoughts that's going through your mind, just that for being, I suppose. And that to me is something really special.
Beautiful, I think. And that works for you. And, so maybe I was a little bit critical of the journaling and not doing it, but I know that you're a big surfer, so you're still getting the benefits. You know, the journaling's an add-on almost, but that's what. How did you get into surfing? Was that from childhood?
No, so I was really big on wakeboarding and just I was always a swimmer. I was always I loved water. And then because I lived up north, so there was no surf there, so I was always wakeboarding. And then coming down here, I've always just been drawn to it. I always wanted to do it. It looked like a cool sport, and you see the culture of surfing like in the 70s and all that, like it's just like free, free care, free loving. And I just thought that was really cool. I just wanted to get into it and see what it was all about. And instantly I was
fantastic.
I was hooked,
and that's, that's a blessing that you found that, And I think we all have something similar, but just in modern life, we don't, for whatever reason, we don't find it. You know, for some people, it's writing or painting or something artistic, or you know, you get sport. You mentioned you get your marathon runners who go into a zone.
Yeah.
You know, you get your golfers who are in the zone and everything else is irrelevant or dumbed down. And I think that's super healthy. And I think as a society at large, we're beginning to lose some of that. You know?
Yeah.
And the cognitive sort of management takes effort and time, and we don't want to look at it. You know, you touched on the shadow, the negative side. We're drilled to not acknowledge some of our behaviours mightn't be the best for us, you know. And one of my punchlines is never underestimate the power of denial, because you'd be surprised how people can trick themselves, justify and rationalize and minimize the behavior. And there's lots of facets of denial, but you know, just the term people shy away from. I do not want to acknowledge that I'm in denial about.
Because there's a lot of shame and guilt around certain
all
things.
those negative emotions that we touched on, but you have to be, you know, Carl Jung said, you know, the shadow knows. You know, you are what you think you become. But there's a dark side to that in terms of we cannot just look at all our positive aspects of our personality. You have to look at the, you know, the things that don't sit well. But again, we're sort of drilled, and it's a difficult one to look at your denial patterns. And most people just shut it down. You know, they close the closet, and the skeletons in the closet, and that's where the shadow is. And you need to know your shadow to have to be a whole individual and have positive psychology.
Yeah, and like there's so many people in the world that have become, I suppose, enlightened or aware or whatever you want to call it, guru or whatever. But all the people that I've followed that have got to that high level of consciousness and awareness, and they've all got there in a different way. So there's not one size that fits all, and I think a lot of people make that mistake where they go see someone and they were promoting how they done it, which is great, but that not be right.
It wasn't the right fit for that individual.
So I think what we need to do as coaches and psychologists and people that are trying to help is put your own what works aside and just explore and find out, talk to them and find out what's going on with them, and don't tell them, you need, just give them different options and let them find out for themselves, right? Give them the power to find out what it is that they need to do to get to whatever level of awareness or whatever it is that they were trying to get to.
Well, and that leads us, as a segue, beautifully into, you know, over the past 25 years, I've developed a program called ECHO, and it has 11 components, and some of them could be deemed as quite generic. So if I take the example of the first is anger and acceptance, and some of that's drawn from ACT, anger and commitment therapy, and radical acceptance. And sort of I was for many years trying to aid people to not be angry, but anger is there for a reason. You cannot avoid anger. It's part of your survival mechanism, your fight or flight. I think for lots of people, it becomes a demon because they don't know how to manage it. But you have to make friends with your anger, the monster that's on your back, and move into acceptance that this is going on. And people don't back to denial. They don't want to acknowledge that they have angry outbursts because people find it very difficult to change, Ryan. You know, it takes effort, and we're drilled to take the easiest path and get into a point of acceptance around anger. That, I think, is universal for humans, to a greater or lesser degree for the individual. Some people might be listening to this and saying, well, I'm never angry. I would tend to disagree, or they manage that better. You know, so giving people particular psychological concepts really can help them.
Yeah.
And not every aspect will apply to every individual.
Yeah, I kind of want to talk about this because I kind of disagree a little bit about the anger thing, just because anger is actually really powerful, right? Because that creates a lot of energy.
Anger is an energy. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and if you've got a lot of energy, you can direct that positively to then make the changes. And I think when people go past the anger and they drop down to even a lower frequency or a lower level, there's that apathy or depression or shame, and them type of people, I think, could welcome anger, because once you get to anger, then you've got the energy to then make. It's very hard to have the energy when you're depressed and apathy. And, you know, I think anger's like the next level up. I think there's a level below that. Does that make sense?
Most definitely. And lovely point, mate, in terms of, so for a long time I've been saying, give me an angry individual and we can shape that because it's energetic, as opposed to someone who's in clinical depression and it's difficult to get any sort of form of motivation happening with that individual. Definitely. So I like the way you frame that. It's lovely.
Because I think once if you are depressed or whatever, and then you bring yourself up to anger, or if you want to make a change and you get to that point, then like you said, I think that's really powerful. And like as you pointed out, that is a really good place to be, because now we know we can transmute that anger into and channel it.
Yeah, that's right, mate. And morph it into something. So to some degree, I agree. Yeah. But then I think when anger spills out into everything, which is really quite common, you see road rage, you see, people being really pissed off with their childhood hasn't been the best for them, and they're stuck in that anger loop, and it's a blame game, and we touched on that in our first session. Yeah. That can be problematic, but it's about the recognition that this is what's happening for you, and giving yourself that space that you touched on before, which I really like, the gap, and it's in the gap then. If you're overwhelmed with anger or any emotion, we touched again on it in the first session about the world wants it to be polemic, black and white. But the reality of human existence is only 5% is black, 5% is white, and the grey zone is 90%. And it's the ability to operate there and not to be drawn into a poor frustration tolerance. Clinically, that's about low frustration tolerance. So everything that's difficult really irritates us and we become angry. That then, remember I touched on a blunted affect and not being receptive to what's going on around you. When you're angry and you've got a frown and you're kicking the cat or whatever it is, people shy away from you. So those connections that you touched on earlier about being receptive, if you're too angry, people shy away and it becomes a blunted emotional effect that I'm pissed off all the time and I'm missing many things. The social interaction, people don't want to be around people who are explosive in rage because they feel uncertain and I'm fearful, Yeah. And I think, again, it's back to the moderation of managing the anger. So I'm with you in terms of anger can be very useful at times. However, if we go into tipping points and it spills over, and then we become the angry individual. I relate to this in a big way as a younger guy, for difficult upbringing and, not much, not many resources around me. And I was pissed off for many years until I sort of found psychology. And so I'm very passionate about revisiting that and seeing if I can sort of help other people in terms of managing that anger. But yeah, it can be very useful. You're right.
Definitely. So you're talking about, we briefly touched on Echo.
Yeah.
And so just give us a rundown of Echo and your program and sort of like take us step by step, because I'm sure there's a lot of people listening that would like to know, to have the tools and to see like what you've designed and why and how it can help the people that are listening.
Okay, so we start there. There are 11 components, and that's been designed specifically as a back to flow in terms of people's cognitive abilities and raising different emotions and psychological facets of who they are. So we start with anger and acceptance, and that's quite a big one. And then we go look at, strength through life experience. And again, we challenge denial there, that we don't want to, maybe things haven't been great up until this point in your life. And so we then go into avoidance, that I don't want to look at those difficult aspects. You touched on it in our first session about revisiting childhood experience that might have been negative. We shy away from that. So it's not just about life strength through experience of all positive, but lots of negative things. People find themselves in psychological difficulty because their life experience has been negative. You need to be able to draw on that. And we touched on this about anti-fragility. What is it about that experience that has made you better for having been through that? And that's, I hope, is sort of a new twist on psychological well-being, that you have to, it's not just about being resilient and tough and being able to keep moving forward all the time. It's about how are you a better human being for having been through that. And when people have been through particular childhood abuse, whether that be psychological, physical, sexual, they don't want to open that kind of worms. But the true healing occurs in making space for that and being with that experience and drawing on it. And people will say, well, how can anything that was abusive in childhood have improved you as an individual? Well, there are aspects that you've been through that. You survived. We touched on that as well a couple of weeks ago, that you're still living. So you've been through that and you're still surviving.
Yeah, so you've basically conquered 100% of the things that you've been through if you're still there.
Exactly. Brilliant. I like the way that's put. Yeah, and that's the truth. And then we go into...
before you move on, I'd just like to say, everyone that I've come across that has been really successful in bettering their life or becoming more aware or whatever, have all got a story. They've all got a story of that journey of going to a dark place and then finding that shadow or whatever, and then being able to overcome that. So I think that's the difference, is life's not easy, right? And we all know that. And sometimes we feel like other people got better lives or whatever, but we all go through tough periods, and we all go through a lot of anguish and a lot of pain and disappointment and all that. But it's how you react in that moment and what you do with that's going to really determine the outcome of your life.
That's right.
So, yeah, when I hear people go, oh, yeah, my life's, I've hit rock bottom, we all go through that, right? So now's the time where you can use that energy through anger. You might be angry about it or whatever, but it's that's when you really need to step up. And I think if you do, the more you do that, the more you want to do that. And it's like that snowball effect, So generally in our lives, we very rarely stay stagnant. I think we either build on getting better, or if we stop, then we end up going in the reverse, right? So you need to choose which way you want to go.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, because I think a lot of people feel like, life's doing them more hard for them than what it is other people. That's certainly not the case.
Well, yeah, that's keeping up with the Joneses. It's called social comparison. How much money has such and such got in his account, or what sort of car does he drive, or where does one live, or what's the occupation. And we are hardwired to look around us and see where people, because we sort of mimic and we get ideas from others. We swap ideas. That's the beauty beautiful thing about being human, that we can converse and we can look at sort of abstract concepts and no other animal on the planet is as aware of their emotional tone, their emotional state as humans are. And I think that can be a double-edged sword. It can be great because one can develop and back to the Echo program is about a tool for self-development and moving forward and gleaning some insight as to what's going on and trying to get a handle on things. But then, the keeping up with the Joneses, we've always done, and advertisers play on that.
100%.
But that, I think it's almost as if this pursuit of perfectionism or the images we're bombarded with through social media, that if you don't have A, B, and C, or you don't look a particular way, then there's somehow the individual is lacking. And I think that's a huge problem. And Echo hopefully tries to empower the individual to address those issues, those internal issues with themselves, and to transcend sort of that immediate stimulus and input that we're all subjected to.
So that's the acceptance side of things.
That's an acceptance side, that this is what's going, and life. I don't mean to be too negative, but we all age. And with aging comes illness.
Speak about yourself there, right? I'm going to stay young forever.
Yeah, well...
we all want to, right?
Yeah,
we all wish to, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, there was an interesting... just a sort of bit of a tangential idea, but there was an experiment done in the 70s about an elixir of life, that if you took this potion, you would stay at any age you wanted, never decay, never become ill, but you could never die. You will be eternal. So I don't want to divulge your age at the moment, Ryan, but if from my side, say, I could remain 26 and healthy forever, but everyone around me is going to die. Everyone's going to pass on because that's part of the natural life cycle, yeah? How many people do you think would consume the elixir and stay young forever?
I think a lot would, without thinking of the repercussions. Well, they think they would, but then once they did it, I think they'd realize...
89% said no.
Oh, really?
Right. I think I would have been one of the 11.
Yeah.
As a die-hard Liverpool fan, I wanted to be the longest Liverpool supporter of all time. Yeah. But then you get into the concept of it, and I mean,
well, it's not natural, right? It's not natural.
Well, you can look at sort of medicine, and we spoke about a disease model previously and how that is. However, life expectancy is increasing exponentially. So if you go back 200 years ago, you were going to make maybe 30 or 40 years of age. Now we're on 75 for a guy, approximately. Yeah. So that longevity is something that we pursue. Antibiotics, I know there's all sorts of, and vaccinations to prolong life.
Yeah, I don't want to go off too much of a tangent, but I think it's all about quality of life for me. So if if I'm 80 or whatever, and they might be keeping me alive, but if I got to take 1,000,000 pills and I'm just sitting in the house doing nothing all day, to me, I'd rather pass on, I think.
Okay, that's more of a philosophical bent, and I think we should stick to our psychology this morning. Okay, so you mentioned the acceptance and the anger, so and then from there, and then reflection on your life experiences and drawing from even the negative, and then I'm a big interest is motivation. So the third component is about motivation and locus of control. Are you driving your own existence? And then another facet of there is about fairy tales and how we're conditioned to believe that we're going to play for Liverpool, or we're going to be the greatest, we're going to be the next Kelly Slater, or the way society conditions and trains us to have these great expectations, and yet then we fall short, and then that generates that spiral that we've touched on, into depression or anger or frustration or whatever that be. A big thing that, you know, I'm very passionate about is suicide prevention, because that's another facet of the ECHO program, and not just to look at the individual who was successful. I know that sounds oxymoronic in terms of, you know, you're successful at taking your own life, but the people who are left behind, you know, for each suicide, the numbers suggest that, you know, you've got as many as 16, 17 other human beings who are really, really damaged,
devastated
by the death of that person. Another facet. So the way that the program is put together, it flows, and then we look at sort of the grief cycles, and that was, you know, there's a backstory to there with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who developed grief, and she was looking at the individual who was passing away, and then realised the grief cycle really applied more to the people who survived that individual. And, you know, I think the sort of, ultimately you go to acceptance. So that's how ECHO is designed, that you get into denial is the first aspect of grief, and then bargaining, only if I'd have done something different, or maybe then depression and anger. And it's not linear. You know, you can jump back and forth into
100%.
these, but ultimately you get to acceptance. And but grief is multifaceted, Ryan. You know, the grieving for a child is different for you touched on, you know, if you were 80 years of age and being kept alive, I think naturally, you know, you've had a good life. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. And then the conclusion is this is what we do. But with that ECHO, you know, is as you move towards old age, do you begin to grieve about the loss of time, the loss of life? So it doesn't necessarily have to revolve around the death of an individual. Can you grieve for the time you've lost? Can you grieve for the aging process?
Oh, there's multiple things.
Oh, you could go on.
Yeah.
Well, that's all contained within ECHO.
Yeah, cool.
You know,
there's a really good, I just thought about a really good model when we're talking about spiraling up and down. And I think it was Tony Robbins that got this model, is so everyone starts with a potential. So right now we've got a certain potential, us sitting right here. Yeah. And then from potential, you take an action. Whether that be, one action could be go to the gym, positive, right? And then from that action, you get a result, you feel good. And then when you feel good, you're at a higher potential. So now you're at a higher potential, so then your next action
so you're spiraling
up. But then what if you decide, okay, I'm not going to go to the gym, I'm going to watch TV and eat some chips.
Yeah.
That was your action. Now, what was the result? You feel like shit, you didn't go to the gym, now your potential is down. So see how it's very easy to spiral up and it's very easy to spiral down. So, you know, I mean, that's in the moment when you don't want to go to the gym or you don't want to do the things that you know you should be doing. Think about that model and think about how am I going to feel afterwards? And then that can then help with your potential or your motivation then to then, okay, I need to do this. And how many gym sessions have you been to where you go, oh, I wish I didn't do that gym session? Zero, right?
Yeah, of course, mate. But what you sort of, I think, you're articulating there, Ryan, is about consequential thought. So some research I've done many years ago is about the prefrontal cortex, and this region of your brain just behind your forehead. Your frontal lobes are responsible for your consequential thought, impulse control, and executive function, the ability to think cleverly about and project into the future. When you're angry, when you're depressed, that region of the brain, when you're in fight or flight, when you're anxious all the time, that structure doesn't operate efficiently. So what you articulated there about going to the gym, not going to the gym, and rather eating some horrible food or whatever it be, your consequential thought isn't operating efficiently. And so you start making bad decisions, and that then puts you on that negative downward spiral.
Yeah.
You know? So again, you know, that's one of the aspects of the program that we look at, and giving individuals some insight as to the anatomical and the neurophysiological aspect of what's actually happening. And I think people are really quite savvy in this day and age, and they want to understand. You know, one of my driving forces is to allow the individual to get a concept and an idea of abstract sort of facets of who we are, you know, and empower people with understand your prefrontal cortex, you know. I'm rather than go, oh, it's a big term, it's technical, it's clinical, it's like anything, you know. The more you be with it, the more you understand.
Yeah.
And I think you touched on it about the reptilian brain, and you know, there's a struggle there about immediate gratification, and a good example is the diet. And back to what we said earlier about, you know, the fast food people generate sugar and fat, which isn't healthy for us, but they know that we're going to.
Yeah, it's the sugar's got that addictive component to it too. I think definitely lights up the same part of the brain as cocaine. You know what I mean?
Brilliant,
yeah. So
then we move into substance abuse. So the program is an actual flow here.
Yeah.
Because that's triggering you to think about addictive behaviours. You know, and the default setting is the heroin addict or the alcoholic or the cocaine addict or the crystal meth is big at the moment. But are you addicted to particular thought patterns? So
100%.
All of the above is applicable, and it's interesting. You know, people say to me, "Well, what's the biggest drug of addiction or the most damaging?" And they jump to heroin or cocaine, alcohol. You know,
100%.
And alcohol is socially acceptable. It's cheap. It's so freely available, and it's almost encouraged by society.
It is definitely, especially the Australian culture.
And the English, you know, where I come from.
I know where I work, when I go out to the mines and stuff, like if you don't go to the bar, you're going to get shit, you know what I mean? Like it's almost like you have to
become ostracised almost,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't want to digress, but I can. So if we look at Ryan, that's brilliant point, mate. He might be out with the boys, you finish the shift, you're in the pub, and you choose to have a water or a soft drink or whatever that is, yeah? And all the other boys encourage you and give you grief down the banks about why aren't you, why do they do that?
Because this is my theory.
Go on.
So I believe that if you are trying to make changes to better your life, that shines a light on something that they know they should be doing. So they want to bring you back down to that level. Beautiful. Because then they're comfortable, and because all you're doing is shining a light on them, right? So a lot of people
think of it differently. You become a mirror, and there's no intention of you from your side to have them look at their shadow.
No.
Yeah?
But it's natural for us to do that.
But we do that, yeah. And so you're quite right. You know, you've got a great take on that, mate. So you're having a water, they're all drinking the schooners. And I'll be completely honest here. I've been on the other side when mates, not for decades now, but mates who recognised that they were over drinking, you like, or drinking at inappropriate times, and they wanted to make a change. And I have been guilty. I'll put my hand up and, you know, and put pressure on them, because I like the Ryan who's a bit tipsy and he's had 5 schooners and we're talking absolute garbage and I'm watching, and now this Ryan's drinking water. You know, are you too good to drink with us? That gets levelled at the individual.
Yeah.
But I think as much as you and I can recognize and speak about it, it's a big problem in terms of the individual's ability to recognize this is an issue, and then this social set keeping them stuck in it, you know, or alienating them, or now they don't fit in the pub, and you'll hear rubbish like never trust somebody who doesn't like a beer, you know. And I don't want to digress here, mate, but alcohol is a big problem.
100%.
And we are inculcated and initiated, and it's almost a rite of passage, but it's so damaging for human beings, you know.
Yeah,
And I don't want to be too negative.
No.
I'll put my hand up. I love a beer.
Me too.
I love a nice glass of wine with my meal. Not every day, but you know. And if we talked about people going through journeys, you know, there was probably a time when I thought, crikey, you're using this as a crutch. This is not a social. It's not hanging out with your friends, or it's not a nice glass of red over a nice steak, whatever that be. I've had to moderate, you know, through my life. Not that I'd sort of label myself with an alcoholic diagnosis. However, I have recognised that it's been a problem in the past.
Yeah, well, I think they talk about, I've done a bit of research into like drinking, I think, pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, alcohol and benzos, which is like your Valium and your...
most difficult to withdraw from.
Yeah, they got the biggest physical withdrawal out of all of them, and this is, one of them's legal. We can go drink it every, you know.
Well, the benzos are legal. So the benzodiazepine family, you've mentioned, basically the big one that jumps out is diazepam/Valium, yeah? And then you get into temazepam, sleeping tablets. Then you get into Ativan, which is lorazepam. But they're all sedative, basically. And you're quite right. And I think we touched on Jordan Peterson. He has recently gone through he's had to withdraw from Valium, basically. He had to be put to sleep. You know, this is a very bright guy who's very motivated, very driven. But I'm glad you raised that, because his withdrawal was so pronounced that he had to go into some form of sleep therapy. Wow. I don't know all the details. Just to cap that off, but that's an aspect. Substance abuse, you know, in terms of the ECHO program, is massive. And that comes a little bit further into the program, because, you know, it's so prevalent. And I think one needs to be in a particular mindset to see it for, you know, and I'm not saying let's everybody have a sober life. You know, we touched on it earlier or last time that you need an altered state of consciousness. And in this day and age, people find that through drugs and alcohol rather than surfing or running or being creative. It's too easy. It's the default setting. It's that easier, I want to blot things out, but again, that generates that blunted effect. And it's not just the stress of modern day life or relationship breakdown or trauma as a child. It then blunts everything, the physical aspect of who we are, the emotional, the relationship aspect. You know, the bottom line is, and people aren't going to like this, but I'm going to say it anyway, that if we found alcohol tomorrow, ethanol, we'd ban it. Yeah, without 100%. A doubt. Yeah. But it's so lucrative. It's such a money spin. It's so entrenched in our culture but it's money, you know, despite the domestic violence driven by alcohol, the traffic deaths, lots driven by alcohol, violence, family breakdown, suicide. Such a huge portion of suicide is linked to substance abuse, you know?
Yeah.
And that isn't to say that, I won't enjoy a beer probably later on. But that moderation is everything. And finding a balance and having other aspects of our lives that are as important as having a beer, you know? But I think it's a runaway train, my friend. I really do. And just to think of the cultural implications, you know, it's toxic.
Yeah.
It's a poison. That's what you're doing. You're poisoning yourself. And we spoke about the prefrontal cortex and all those clever functions of our brain. They are the first to be damaged through alcohol abuse.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so
it's a sobering thought.
Yeah,
wasn't it?
that really sort
took
of
the wind out of sails there.
Yeah. All right, so moving along with your program. So where do we go from there?
So we've spoken about grief and vicious cycles. We've spoken about low frustration tolerance and the inability to deal with life's niggles, if you like, or obstacles that arise, and then one becomes not problem solving, but reactionary. And we spoke about that before, about responding rather than being reactive. But I sort of think about, and then we look at depression. We look at the treatment around depression, and medication and placebo effect, which I'm really interested in. I think your listeners will understand the concept of placebo. The one individual has the active medication, the other one is given a similar pill, and the power of the mind informs the individual that they are improving. And there is a time and place for medication. I think it's overprescribed. I think it's it's $1 trillion industry. I think the economic aspects of antidepressants actually sort of taint the whole therapeutic approach. And I've come across many thousands of times, without exaggerating, of the individual went to see one doctor, and then one of the big problems that the pharmaceutical companies will give you is called non-compliance. So Trystan goes and he's not in the best headspace, he's down. Is he depressed? Is he not depressed? He doesn't know. Is he anxious? Is he chronically anxious? That's where the benzodiazepines come in as a sedative, which, if used properly, can be great. However, the propensity, for addiction, and I think there's an overprescription, and I think the GPs and psychiatrists are too quick to go to a script pad because it's deemed a quick fix, and it's also being driven by, it's being incentivized in terms of money. And that in itself flies in the face of good therapeutic, the best practice.
Definitely. So if anyone at home wants to listen to or read something, you want to know how powerful the placebo effect is, Dr. Bruce Lipton's got a good book called The Placebo. And it's some of the stuff that he writes about in there, some cultures and some of the stuff that the body can overcome is absolutely, it's fascinating.
Well, we're designed to heal, Ryan. That's what we're designed to do, and society would have us distracted and not being with that healing process. You can make incremental improvements, and the ripple effect, the domino effect. As you said, that one gym session that maybe you didn't feel up for initially, that's
the one you have to do.
That's the one you have to do. It's easy when you're feeling confident and the ego's strong, and you like the way you're looking. It's when back to the shadow. It's when I'd rather eat the fast food and drink a few beers than actually get off my backside.
Motivation will get you started. Discipline will keep you there.
That's right, mate. I love it, and that's part of the Echo program. And again, so it's actually in flow here. The idea being that we generate, from one phase to the next, we're actually opening our mind and being more receptive and being with our issues rather than having to shy away. And then each topic leads into the next. It's specifically designed in terms of its content to assist people and get them, okay, so what do we mean by placebo? And it's great you brought up the book you've just mentioned, that people want to know that. And when they get into that concept, then other things open up. It's like, okay, so the power of the mind is monstrous.
Opens a lot of doors.
But if it's not being used in a healthy, it can be back to the shadow. It can be so negative, and being in those negative loops. And then the next phase would be looking at neuroplasticity. Big terminology. All it means is the brain is malleable, shapeable.
So it was only 25, I could be wrong with this figure, but it was only 25 or maybe 30 years ago that we were told, can't teach old dog new tricks, and after a certain age you couldn't change your mind. But that's all completely changed now. They're saying, you can change your mind whether you're 7 or 70. It doesn't really
matter. Every 7 years, every cell in your body is reproduced and rejuvenated. Yeah, and you're quite right. So when I started out in psychology, my first degree, we were drilled that your brain was like the hard drive of a computer, and then once there was a fault or there was a break, then it wouldn't repair. And a very clever guy called V.S. Ramachandran was looking at patients with stroke, and there's a paralysis on one side, and he put a mirror in front of them with the not the paralyzed side, but the healthy side, and a mirror, and he actually tricked the brain into believing that the paralysis wasn't there. And the wonder of it was he realized the brain would rewire itself, and that's where neuroplasticity was born from. Clever, you know. And again, the positive is, you know, what you think you become. You know, when we first met, I touched on, you know, you hear, you are what you do, you are what you eat. Well, yeah, to some degree. However, the crux of the matter is you are what you think. And that's, you know, inspiring. However, if you're stuck in an automatic negative loop that life is rubbish or you're not worthy or you're lacking, you're also reinforcing those neural networks.
Definitely.
And neurons that fire together, wire together.
Yeah, I heard about, I looked into multiple personality disorder. And when that person changes from one person to another and they truly believe that they are, it changes their eye color. It changes whether they got diabetes. It changes everything. How powerful is that? Just from that belief of I've changed from this person to that person, it physically changes like that. And that's true. You can look that up. That is, and
it is. You're giving me. Yeah.
That blew me away. Like even changing eye color. Like
wow.
Yeah.
And beliefs is a big facet in the Echo program. Are your beliefs outdated? Where do your beliefs come from? You know, they come from your parents, maybe. We spoke about
are they yours or they've been given to you?
We spoke about generational differences. You know, you sort of and change of belief is difficult because we think if we stick to what we believe in, then we won't unravel. And there's a fear that if you begin to challenge that, it's almost an identity crisis, that letting go of old, dysfunctional, negative belief patterns that no longer serve the individual, then somehow they lose some of their identity or their self, if you like, you know.
Yeah, we built up this big conception of who we think we are.
Yeah. And the deconstruction thereof, back to the shadow, you know, to deconstruct and break it down and start again, you know. We think we need to be continue, and that's why the behaviours, the negative behaviours, are repeated over and over again, and that dissonance of I've done it again. You know, you look at addiction, you look at something like alcoholism. You know, the next time the individual relapses, they go even further back, and you touched on that. It's not that they, you know, that they sort of are stagnant. They have actually gone into a retrospective negative effect, if you like, affect.
Yeah. So if there's if people want to get in contact with you with regards to Echo, how can they get in contact with you?
Yeah, they can email me, and that's probably the best. The whole Echo program will be online soon. It's gone through, and it's an ongoing process. There isn't, you know, a definitive answer for everyone. We touched on that at the beginning. That some people will take different aspects of it. The substance abuse might be pertinent to where they're up to, or they might be going through grief, you know, and not just the loss of someone, maybe a relationship breakdown or work changes or aging, and that might be what they're seeking to understand, you know. But the idea being that the whole package will help the individual. That's where Echo is coming from.
Yeah. Okay, so if there's one piece of advice that you'd like to give, and if there's one gold nugget that you'd like to give to the audience today, what would it be?
It would be that small moves, small positive actions have a ripple effect.
Bite-sized chunks.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised how quickly, in terms of positivity, those little changes.
That's that spiral up.
That's a spiral upwards.
Yeah.
You know, you make room for the thoughts in the gap. You make room for physical improvements. You know, and people will listen to this podcast and maybe they're carrying too much weight and they think, well, what's the point? But incremental, you can reverse disease, you can reverse diabetes, but you have to start somewhere. And it's the ability to make the first move. Definitely. And then it becomes easier and easier. But ultimately, you know, my line is you are what you think.
Yeah.
And if that's positive, great. If it's negative, maybe you need to make a change.
And I think it's real important for you, whether you're going through, you know, weight, addiction, whatever it is, go research people that have been in that position and come out the other side, and you'll see some crazy stories, and you'll be inspired, because sometimes we think, oh, I can't do that, but if someone else can do it, you can do it too, right? Yeah. So that's something that I found has helped me on my journey, is always looking to people that have been through stuff and come out the other side, and there's so many people to choose from, and it really keeps me motivated and determined to keep working on myself and keep being better every single day.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. And it's you know, mindset is huge. But the understanding of being the master of your own psychology, it's great to have assistance and help, and that, you know, that's the premise behind Echo, to give people, but you need to be in charge. This is your life, you know, and we're all very easily distracted and get stuck in avoidance, or, you know, that downward spiral, or being too. It's interesting that, you know, we don't treat our pets as badly as we treat ourselves at times, you
definitely.
know. But that exploration, you touched on it, about knowledge being power, and it is. But you have to look at both the light and the shadow side.
Definitely. Well, I think we'll finish up there. I like this. This is your life, guys, and it really is. So make of it what you will. And thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you having you.
Lovely, Ryan.
And
Thank
it's
you
always
very
nice
much.
chatting with you. So awesome.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Neuronirvana podcast. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe. Also, if you'd like to know a bit more about us, jump on Instagram, Neuronirvana_ and Neuronirvana on Facebook. Also, if you'd like to check out our services and if we can help you in any way, jump on our website, neuronirvana.com.au.